You walk out to the garden one morning in April, coffee still warm in your hand, and the lawn beside the vegetable bed looks like something has been plowing it in the dark. A ridge of loose soil snaking across the grass, a mound here, another mound 20 feet away. You press your boot down near the edge of the flower bed, and the ground gives slightly, soft and hollow, where there should be solid earth. Moles, or voles, which is a different animal doing different damage, but gets blamed in the same breath. And most folks could not tell you which one they actually have. So you call somebody. The pest control company sends a man out. He walks the property with a notepad, and he hands you a quote. A seasonal contract, $250, $300. Sometimes more, depending on how bad it is and how big your yard is. He sets traps. He puts down bait stations. He comes back in 3 weeks to check them and refill them. And here is the part that should bother you more than it probably does. He is not getting rid of the moles in your neighborhood. He is making your yard a slightly less appealing stop on their route through everyone's yard. The moles 2 properties over are doing just fine, and sooner or later, one of them is going to wander back through the gap in your fence. Now I want you to sit with something. There is a flower, an ordinary, cheerful, bright yellow spring flower that you have probably seen in front of half the houses on your street without ever thinking twice about it. Planted in a simple ring around the edge of a garden bed, this flower has kept the ground inside that ring completely free of mole and vole tunneling on this farm for over 100 years. Not because it scares them, not because it makes a sound or a smell that drives them off in fear, because of a chemical the plant carries in every part of itself, bulb, stem, leaf, flower, that makes the ground around it something no mole or vole wants anything to do with. My name is Silas Miller. I am Amish, and I farm this land in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. My grandfather planted daffodils around the border of every garden bed on this property when he built this farm, and I have planted the same border around every bed I have ever dug since. In this video, I'm going to tell you exactly why this works, exactly how to plant it so it works for you, and the honest limits, because this is a real method with a real mechanism, not folklore. And, like every real method, it has a scope where it excels, and a scope where you need something more. Before I explain the flower, I want to clear up something that trips up almost everyone who has this problem, because mistaking one animal for the other leads you to fix the wrong thing entirely. Moles and voles are not the same animal, and they do different damage for different reasons. A mole is almost blind, lives almost entirely underground, and eats earthworms, grubs, and insect larvae. A mole is not interested in your plants at all. It could not care less about your tomatoes or your tulip bulbs. The damage a mole does is structural. It tunnels in search of food, and the raised ridges and volcano-shaped mounds you see are the byproduct of that digging, not an attack on your garden. A mole tunnel running under a flower bed can still damage roots and create air pockets that dry out the soil around your plants. But the mole itself never takes a single bite of anything you planted. A vole, by contrast, looks like a fat little mouse with a short tail, lives part of its life on the surface and part of it in shallow burrows, and eats plants directly: bulbs, roots, bark at the base of young trees, the crowns of your perennials. Voles will also happily use mole tunnels as travel corridors once the mole has dug them, which is why people often blame one animal for the work of 2. If your tulip bulbs are disappearing and the plant just vanishes from the ground, That is vole work. If you have raised ridges and mounds, but your plants are intact, that is mole work. Or, at minimum, it is mole tunneling that a vole has not yet exploited. The flower border addresses both, but through slightly different mechanisms for each, and I will explain both. The flower is the daffodil. The common spring bulb, narcissus, the same one blooming in cheerful yellow clumps in front yards everywhere, every April. Every part of the daffodil, the bulb most of all, but also the leaves, the stem, and the flower itself, contains an alkaloid compound called licorine. Licorine is bitter, mildly toxic, and deeply unpleasant to the digestive systems of small burrowing mammals. A vole that takes a bite of a daffodil bulb gets a stomach full of a compound its body recognizes immediately as something to avoid in the future. It does not take many bad experiences with licorine for a vole to learn and to communicate through its own behavior, since voles travel established paths and avoid areas where other voles in the colony have had a bad experience, that this entire bed is not worth the trouble. The bulb sits in the ground exactly where a vole would normally tunnel and feed, and instead of a meal, it offers a lesson the vole does not forget. For moles, the mechanism is slightly different, because a mole is not eating your plants in the first place. What the daffodil border does for moles is twofold. First, licorine leaches slowly from the bulbs into the surrounding soil over time, and that altered soil chemistry is believed to make the immediate area less attractive to the earthworms and grubs that moles are actually hunting for. Fewer worms, less reason for a mole to tunnel through that specific patch. Second, and this matters more than people realize, a tightly planted ring of daffodil bulbs creates a dense mat of root and bulb material that is simply harder and less rewarding for a mole to push through compared to open, loose garden soil. Moles take the path of least resistance. A dense bulb border is more resistance than the open bed beyond it, and the mole's tunnel tends to curve around it rather than through it. The combination, chemical deterrent for the plant-eating vole, and chemical plus physical deterrent for the worm-hunting mole, is why a single border planting handles both animals, even though they are causing different kinds of damage for different reasons. Now let me tell you exactly how to plant this so that it actually works, because spacing and density matter more than most gardening advice tells you. Daffodil bulbs should be planted in a continuous ring around the perimeter of the bed you want to protect, spaced 4 to 6 inches apart, bulb to bulb. This is closer than the typical decorative spacing you see recommended for daffodils planted simply for their flowers. A decorative planting might space them 8 or 10 inches apart for a fuller look as they mature, but a protective border wants a tighter, more continuous barrier, with no real gaps for a vole or mole to slip through. Plant the bulbs at a depth of about 6 inches, pointed end up, in well-draining soil. Daffodils are remarkably forgiving and will tolerate a wide range of soil types, which is part of why this method works in so many different gardens across so many different states. Plant them in fall, ideally September through November depending on your climate, so they have the cold winter period they need to bloom reliably the following spring. Once established, a daffodil bed is a perennial planting. You are not replanting this every year. The bulbs multiply on their own over several seasons, and a border that starts as a single ring will, after 3 or 4 years, become a dense, self-sustaining barrier that requires no further work from you beyond an occasional thinning if it becomes overcrowded. For an existing bed that already has a mole or vole problem, Plant the border this fall and expect the full protective effect to build over the first full growing season, as the bulbs establish their root systems and the licorine begins to work its way into the surrounding soil chemistry. This is not an instant fix the week you plant it. It is a permanent fix that takes one season to fully establish and then asks nothing more of you for as long as the bulbs are in the ground, which, for daffodils, can be decades. Now, I owe you the honest limits of this method, because I will not let you believe it does more than it does. This border protects what is inside the ring. It does not clear moles and voles from your entire property. If you have 5 acres and a mole problem across the whole lawn, a daffodil border around your vegetable garden will protect that vegetable garden specifically and will not touch the mole activity in the rest of the yard. This is a targeted defense for a specific bed, not a property-wide solution. For broader lawn protection, you would need a much larger planted area, or you would need to combine this with other methods for the open lawn itself. It also will not eliminate an established, severe vole population overnight. If voles have been breeding in your garden for several seasons already, the border will stop new incursions and will make the protected bed inhospitable. But any voles already established with deep burrow systems nearby may take a season to relocate fully. Patience matters here, the same way it matters with every method that works with biology instead of against it through brute force. And I need to be direct about safety, because daffodil bulbs and foliage contain that same licorine that makes them unappealing to moles and voles, and that toxicity is not selective by species in the way we might wish. Daffodil bulbs are toxic to dogs, cats, and to small children if eaten in any quantity. This is not a border to plant if you have a dog that digs and chews indiscriminately, or a toddler who puts things in their mouth while playing in the garden unsupervised. The toxicity is mild to moderate in most cases, typically causing stomach upset rather than anything life-threatening, but mild is not the same as harmless, and I would rather you know this clearly than discover it by accident. If you have digging dogs or young children with regular, unsupervised access to the garden bed, this method needs a fence or a supervised garden, or it is not the right method for your household at this time. For most households, gardens that adults tend, that pets are trained around, that children visit under supervision, this is no more concern than any number of common garden plants that carry the same caution, and daffodils have been planted in family gardens for generations without incident, specifically because the toxicity, while real, is mild, and the plant is not appealing to taste in the way something sweeter might be. Now I want to take a moment, because this is the part that matters most. Think about what we have just walked through. A flower that costs perhaps $3 to $5 for a bag of a dozen bulbs at any garden center in the fall, planted once, requiring no spray, no trap, no bait station, no contract, no monthly visit from anyone. A plant that does the work itself every single day for as long as it is in the ground, which for a daffodil bulb is measured in decades, not seasons. And on the other side of that fact, an entire seasonal industry built on trapping and retrapping the same animals in the same yards year after year, because the underlying reason those animals were attracted to that ground in the first place, the worms, the grubs, the unprotected bulbs of other plants, was never addressed. A trap removes the mole that is there today. It does nothing to make the ground less attractive to the next mole that wanders through next spring, drawn by the same earthworms that drew the first one. The contract renews because the yard never stopped being a good place for a mole to live. Only the mole currently occupying it changes. A border of daffodils changes the ground itself. It does not wait for a mole to arrive and then catch it. It makes the specific patch of earth inside that ring a place no mole or vole finds worth the trouble, season after season, without anyone needing to remember to do anything. My grandfather did not plant daffodils because he had read a study on licorene. He planted them because his mother showed him, and because 3 generations of watching which garden beds got tunneled through and which ones never did had taught the women in his family something the rest of the country has had to rediscover, generation by generation, every time someone forgets and has to call the man with the traps again. There is no money in a bag of bulbs you plant once and never buy again. There is real money in a trapping contract that renews every spring, because the moles always come back to ground that still smells like worms and grubs and unprotected roots. Nobody is going to advertise the bulb to you with the same urgency they advertise the contract, because the bulb does not need a renewal. So here is what I want you to do this fall. Pick the garden bed that has given you the most trouble, the one with the tunnel ridges along its edge, the one where something keeps eating your bulbs before they bloom. Order or buy a bag of daffodil bulbs, enough to ring the entire perimeter of that bed at 4 to 6 inch spacing. Dig your 6-inch holes, point the bulbs up, and close the ring all the way around with no gaps. Then wait through the winter, watch them bloom in April, and watch what does not happen along that border for the rest of the season. Tell me in the comments below, moles or voles, which one has been tearing up your yard, and how bad has it gotten? Tell me where you garden and what you have already tried. I read every single comment, and the stories you share, what has worked in your soil, your climate, your particular stubborn patch of ground, teach the next person more than anything I could say alone. Next time, since we have been talking about what lives underground in a garden, I am going to show you the old way my family keeps the cutworms and the cabbage worms off the vegetables themselves, using nothing but a strip of cardboard and a habit my grandmother practiced every single morning before breakfast. It costs nothing, it takes 5 minutes a day, and it works better than anything you can spray. It is the natural next step after today, and you will not want to miss it. Until then, plant the ring, close every gap, and remember, the people who built this country with their hands knew things we are only just starting to remember.